Hello, welcome to World Report. I'm Jash Hirani. On April 22, 2026, on the occasion of the 70th anniversary of the Declaration of Israel, the Embassy of the Russian Federation in Israel released a message which didn't receive the attention it deserved in the media. Let me read out the message. The title goes as follows: Ambassador of Russia to Israel, Anatoly Viktorov's congratulatory message on the occasion of Independence Day of the State of Israel. The message goes as follows: I congratulate the citizens of the State of Israel, compatriots and friends on the 70th anniversary of the Declaration of Israel's independence. Moscow holds a special place in the history of the State of Israel. As it is known, in May 1948, the USSR was the first to recognize Israel de jure. One should not forget that the substantial assistance provided by the Soviet Union helped the young state to defend its sovereignty during the War of Independence. This year marks the 35th anniversary of the restoration of diplomatic relations between our countries. This important date confirms the stability of our bilateral dialogue and indicates significant potential for its further development. Shared historical memory about the Great Patriotic War and the Second World War is of great importance to our people. The Red Army, in which ranks about 5 lakh Jews fought, made a decisive contribution to the defeat of Nazism, the liberation of Europe from the Brown Plague, and the end of the horrors of Holocaust. We are united in our rejection of attempts to rewrite history, to swap the roles of victims and executioners, to bring to oblivion the feat of the Red Army soldiers, and to deny the Holocaust. Dear Israelis, dear friends, on this day I wish you and your loved ones a peaceful sky above, good health, well-being and prosperity. Now, in this hour of conflict in West Asia, where technically Israel and Russia are at odds with each other, trying to diminish each other's presence in the region, where Russia via Iran is confronting Israel and Israel is trying its level best to annihilate Iran, Russia's key ally in West Asia, this message carries added significance. While many things have been stated in congratulatory message from Russia to Israel, let us delve deeper into what the Israel-USSR relationship was, when the ties between the two snapped, and whether both sides engaged with each other while being at odds at the same time. Let's discuss the situation in Europe that led to the announcement of the Balfour Declaration and ultimately the creation of Israel, and what role the USSR played in the creation of Israel. We shall also discuss a letter written by German-born American physicist who was also a Jew, which is Albert Einstein, to India's first Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, seeking support for the creation of Israel. Let's start with the Zionist movement in Europe before the First World War. For starters, let me briefly explain what the Zionist movement actually is. Jewish theology believes that there will be a movement to establish a Jewish homeland in the historic land of Israel, where Palestine once existed. The movement gained momentum in the early 20th century in Europe due to the persecution of Jews in Eastern Europe and Russia. It was during this time, in 1906, Israel's first Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion migrated from Poland, a territory controlled by Russia at that time, and who had a socialist thought process and ideology that dominated Israeli politics for years. Thus, Theodor Herzl, who is also known as the father of Zionism, advocated this philosophy and led the Zionist movement in the late 19th and the early 20th century. The most surprising part here is that most of the European Jewish community did not support or advocate the idea of Zionism initially. In Western European nations, the Jewish community was slowly and steadily integrating into their respective societies. Zionists were actually a minority within the Jewish community, especially among the elite, because the idea of Zionism raised questions regarding the commitment of Jews in the British society. The philosophy suggested that Jews would always want to return to Israel and thus might not be fully committed to their current nations, in this case Britain. The Jewish elite for years fought for acceptance into the British society. They were initially excluded from parliament until 1858, and later Benjamin Disraeli became the first and the only Jewish Prime Minister of Britain. The Jewish elite, even in the realm of banking and finance, initially struggled to demonstrate their influence in the British society. Thus, the road to acceptance and positions of power was long, and many Jews did not want to risk losing that progress by supporting Zionism, which could imply that their primary allegiance was not to Britain but to a future Jewish homeland. Another example is the British Secretary of State for India, Edwin Montagu. Remember the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms of 1919, which increased the participation of Indians in the governance and introduced bicameralism in India. He is that Edwin Montagu. Edwin Montagu was a Jew in the British society and a staunch opposer of Zionism. He said, "I deny that Palestine is today associated with the Jews or properly regarded as a fit place for them to live." He thought that this would threaten the political rights of Jews in the Western countries. Montagu wanted to establish that Jews in Britain were first and foremost British. However, in the later course of history, prominent Zionists in the European society like Chaim Weizmann and Herbert Samuel, both very influential in the British establishment, managed to convince the British government that Jews were an influential community in Europe and that gaining global Jewish support would help Britain in the war. Therefore, the government should accept the idea of Zionism. Remember, the First World War was ongoing, where Britain, along with the French and Russians, was fighting Germany, Austria and the Ottomans, and the British believed that Jewish support could be key to winning the war. Thus, they accepted Zionism as a policy, and in 1917, the Balfour Declaration was announced. This declaration was a letter by British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to the member of the British House of Lords, Lord Rothschild, on 2nd November 1917. The letter goes as follows: November 2nd, 1917. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you, on behalf of the Majesty's government, the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the Cabinet. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object. It being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours sincerely, Arthur James Balfour. The region where Israel was to be created was important to the British as it was close to the Suez Canal and the Sinai Peninsula, which served as a gateway to the Indian Empire. Mass migration began from Europe to Palestine, and significant Arab opposition emerged in the form of protests against the British in the 1920s. Following the fall of the Kaiser Empire in Germany and the rise of the Nazis under Adolf Hitler, about 5 to 6 million Jews were killed in the concentration camps in Germany. While the Jewish Holocaust was taking place in Germany under Hitler, many Jewish scientists, thinkers, writers, philosophers, authors and artists fled Germany. One of them was Mr. Albert Einstein, who would later write a letter to Pandit Nehru seeking India's support for the creation of Israel. During the Nazi regime, a wave of migration took place from Europe to Palestine, later to be named as Israel. Except for one, all the major Allied powers that fought the Second World War against the Nazis, France, America and Russia, were in favor of creating a Jewish state of Israel in the Levant region of the Middle East. The Americans and the Russians were heavily interested in the creation of Israel, as Britain was a declining empire post-World War II, exiting regions like India and the Middle East. Either the Russians or the Americans would dominate the regions that the British would vacate. Britain, which had orchestrated the circumstances that paved the way for the creation of a Jewish state, abstained from voting in the United Nations General Assembly on the partition plan that would divide the region into Israel and Palestine. The reason cited was that the British, who had a diminished presence in the region, didn't want to spoil its relations with the rest of the Arab nations. Anyways, the British were not going to be there in the Middle East, as all the glory and goodwill that once England had shifted to America after the conclusion of the World War II. And another major pole that would be a counterweight to the Americans would be the USSR. The British were not going to play the great game in the times to come. So why upset the Arabs by voting for Israel, thought Britain. Let's discuss the USSR-Israel relationship. Recognition of the State of Israel required a 2/3 majority in the United Nations General Assembly, and the USA and its allies were short of that threshold. The USSR fulfilled that role by voting in favor of Israel and also encouraged its satellite states in Eastern Europe to do the same. The resolution was passed with 33 votes in favor.
לפיכך נתכנסנו, אנו חברי מועצת העם, נציגי היישוב העברי והתנועה הציונית, ביום סיום המנדט הבריטי על ארץ ישראל. ובתוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית, ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות, אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל.
On May 1948, the USA granted de facto recognition to Israel and not de jure recognition, meaning total recognition of the State of Israel, while USSR granted the de jure recognition on May 17, 1948. After the formation of the Jewish state, Israel was embroiled in a conflict with its 5 Arab neighbors attacking them. The Americans had imposed an arms embargo in the region to prevent any kind of escalation. While Arab states already possessed the existing British and French weaponry, Israel lacked arms. Once again, the USSR helped Israel by supplying weapons which included rifles, machine guns, ammunitions, Spitfire aircrafts via the Czechoslovakia. Under Operation Balak, Israel won the 1948 war and Soviet assistance proved decisive. The USSR also provided diplomatic protection to Israel in the United Nations Security Council by blocking resolutions that could have imposed ceasefires at moments unfavorable to Israel. At that time, the global alignment favored closer ties as Israel's Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, a Polish-born migrant from a region once under the Russian control, held strong socialist views. This ideological overlap became a key factor in shaping the Israel-USSR relations. Stalin also thought that Soviet Jews would prove to be a bridge between USSR and Israel, bridging both the nations closer to each other. However, ties later deteriorated when Israel supported the Western Bloc during the Korean War in 1950. Following this rupture, the USSR under Stalin removed the Jewish elite which were occupying the positions of power in the Soviet Union. The USSR post Stalin's death aligned itself with the Arab forces which were to fight Israel. One of the key figures was Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser, followed by Anwar Sadat, who later made a truce with Israel. Egypt was armed with massive Soviet weaponry from the same Czechoslovakia route which USSR once used to arm Israel. Then, following the fall of the Soviet Union in the year 1989, nearly 1 million Jewish population from that region who spoke Russian, consumed Russian media and popular culture migrated to Israel, inflating the population of the Jewish state by 20%. Russia, after the fall of the USSR, saw it as an opportunity to restore ties with the Jewish state, which was once its very dear friend. The congratulatory message that I quoted in the start, where Russia during the ongoing US-Iran war extended an olive branch to Israel, was to woo that population and rebuild the bridge that Moscow once had with Tel Aviv. Let's now discuss Einstein's letter to Nehru for India's support to create Israel. Signifying why Jews needed a separate homeland of their own, Einstein wrote to Nehru saying, "Long before the emergency of Hitler, I made the cause of Zionism mine, because through it I saw a means of correcting a flagrant wrong. I refer to the peculiar disability suffered by the Jewish people, by which they were deprived of the opportunity to live on the same basis as other peoples. Jews have been persecuted as individuals. The Jewish people have been unable to develop fruitfully as a cultural and ethnic group. Zionism offered the means of ending this discrimination. Through the return to the land to which they were bound by close historic ties, Jews sought to abolish this pariah status among peoples." He then ended with, "I trust that you, who so badly have struggled for freedom and justice, will place your great influence on behalf of the claim for justice made by the people who for so long and so dreadfully have suffered from its denial." Nehru's reply to Einstein was as follows. He expressed India's sympathy for Jews but also raised the question of the Arab rights too. Where rights come into conflict, it is not an easy matter to decide. With all our sympathy for the Jews, we must and do feel that the rights and future of the Arabs are involved in this question. Nehru further said, "I do not myself see how this problem can be resolved by violence and conflict on one side or the other. Even if such violence and conflict achieve certain ends for the moment, they must necessarily be temporary. I do earnestly hope that some kind of an agreement might be arrived at between the Arabs and the Jews. I do not think, even as an outside power, can impose its will for long or enforce some new arrangement against the will of the parties concerned." India, along with 13 other countries, voted against the resolution. Nehru's primary argument was that India had a very large Muslim population and he didn't want to upset them by voting in favor of the creation of a Jewish state in the Arabian land. Secondly, Nehru was opposed to partition of a region into religious lines, which happened here in the Indian subcontinent, where the region was divided onto religious lines. So to conclude, what makes the Israel-USSR connection remarkable is not just its contradictions, but its endurance. Despite moving from cooperation to confrontation, the relationship left behind strategic, cultural and political links that still resonate today. In an era where Russia and Israel navigate a delicate balance between rivalry and restraint, this shared history serves as both a constraint and a bridge, quietly influencing decisions in a volatile region. That's all for today's World Report. Till I see you next time, that's next Saturday at 8 p.m. Thanks for watching.